Ferrari has a long history of making limited edition variations on each new model they produce. With modern cars, it's usually some sort of modification to the body and a bump in horsepower. Most of these limited production modern prancing horse variations happen at the end of a model's production. However, with some of the classic models, it was the first few cars produced that ended up being the most collectible limited edition variations. That is exactly what happened with the Ferrari 308 Vetroresina, with only 712 of these fiberglass-bodied cars ever built out of over 12,000 308s in total. The Vetroresina is by far the most coveted of the iconic 308 series. The 308 Vetroresina is called that because in Italian, Vetroresina means fiberglass. And not only was it Ferrari's first fiberglass-bodied car, but it was also the second mid-engine V8 Ferrari produced. So first came the Dino with the mid-engine V6, then the 308 GT4, and that one was designed by Bertone. And it's a very wedgy shape. It's one of those cars where you kind of either love it or hate it. And then the 308, which is still that iconic wedgy shape, but it has a little more curve and fluidity to the body. So it was an instant success. And the 308 fiberglass, they only made a limited production for quite a few reasons. First, when the car was first introduced, a lot of buyers at first really liked it, but they started complaining about the body because when you're driving it, it squeaks, not all of them, but you know, they have more of a tendency than the steel cars to squeak a little, plus the body flex can create spiderweb cracking in the paint really easily. So that was one of the reasons that Ferrari switched to the steel cars. The second reason is because the fiberglass bodies were very labor intensive to build. The fiberglass itself is not very expensive, but it took a lot of time to build, whereas stamping out the steel bodies was a lot easier, which is why so few of the fiberglass cars were produced. So while the fiberglass bodies with the body flex may seem like a downside, there's a lot more upsides to the fiberglass cars. So first, the big one is because the body is fiberglass, everything except for the hood, which is alloy, but everything else is fiberglass. So you never have to worry about rust. It's just not a thing with these cars. And second, the fiberglass means it weighs a whole 331 pounds less than the steel-bodied cars. So and they're all carbureted. So the fiberglass 308s are the first variation, and they were only built for 2 years. So when the 308 was introduced in 1975, and then it went all the way until 77 when they switched over to the steel-bodied cars. So they're all carbureted cars. They're the lightest of the 308s, and they didn't have the catalytic converters. So they were the lightest, the fastest, 255 horsepower, and top speed of about 150 miles an hour, which is one of many reasons why they're just so collectible nowadays. Another thing about the fiberglass 308s is they were all coupes. So you will never find a fiberglass 308 that's a GTS unless somebody modified it, which I personally have never seen. Not that they're not out there, but with so many GTS 308s available, I don't see anyone turning the most valuable of the 308 series into a Targa conversion for any reason. Somebody might have at some point, but not that I've ever seen. So all of the fiberglass cars were coupes, and if it was a Euro car, they had the dry sump, and as a US car, it had wet sump. And so you can't really tell the Euro from the US by looking at it, but if you look at the fiberglass 308s, the way to tell it's fiberglass without taking a magnet and putting a magnet on somebody else's car, or maybe your friend's car or whatever, but you can tell on the A-pillar in the front, there's a seam right here that never appears on any of the other variations except for the fiberglass. So if you look at one of these cars and you see that seam on the front, and then you take a look at the side and you see the US side markers, you can tell it's a US fiberglass car, meaning it's a wet sump car. So while the big difference between the steel-bodied cars and the fiberglass cars, of course, is just the bodies, so the interior of all the 308s is very similar, and I've gone into detail on the Ferrari 308 interiors in other videos. If you want to check any of those out, they're up on my channel now, but I've always loved them because of their analog simplicity and ease of driving and joy of driving. There's really not much like going through the gated shift of an analog Ferrari. It's just an amazing experience. And while the steel 308s have always been kind of considered an entry-level Ferrari, because they built over 12,000 cars, they've always been a little more affordable, which is a great thing. Whereas the fiberglass cars, because they're the rarest of the 308 production, they're not an entry-level Ferrari anymore. They're more of a trophy and a collector's collection, basically. So when you see a fiberglass 308, it's usually not a guy's only 308 or Ferrari. It would be, you know, he bought the best of the best because it is the rarest and the most special. And they really are. I mean, while the steel-bodied 308s are great, I mean, they're amazing cars, the 300+ pound difference, plus the carburation, plus the no catalytic converters, it really does make them the best driving experience out of all the 308s. And while they're all a lot of fun to drive, the little differences, when you've driven a bunch of them, it does add up and it does make a difference. When you're driving this car, you really can tell the weight difference between this and another 308 if you've driven other 308s. And, you know, 300 pounds, 331 pounds may not seem like the most, but it makes a big difference, you know? And while this car, it was sitting for a while, so it needs a service, but it's a good solid car. Plus, one of the things you never have to worry about is rust, you know? I mean, like there's not going to be hidden rust. Chassis rust, you can see if it's there, whereas like if somebody's painted over rust recently and it hasn't had time to bubble up under the paint, you're never going to know. So that's a nice thing about the fiberglass 308s, is you never have to worry about that, you know, which is just one more thing to be able to take off your mind. The lighter the car, like the light 308s, like the fiberglass ones, they just corner so much better. I mean, 308s on their own, they already drive amazing, but fiberglass ones, they just have that extra bit of agility because of the lightweight that makes them just that much more fun and user-friendly and, you know, collectible in general. A lot of people may say that, what's the big difference? Why would you pay so much of a premium for the Vetroresina over a steel-bodied car, when a steel-bodied car, you know, the horsepower difference may not be huge, and we're talking about a couple 100 pounds of weight difference, but to the true collectors and enthusiasts out there, that means everything. And especially when you're talking, like, me and my dad raced together, and if we could drop 331 pounds off the weight of one of our race cars, that would mean the difference between back of the pack and winning first place. I mean, 331 pounds in a car is not a little deal, especially when you're talking about performance cars. And you do almost anything for that couple extra horsepower. If you can gain 10 to 15 horsepower, it means the world in racing. And so that's part of what is ingrained in collectors and enthusiasts, where that little bit may not seem like a whole bunch to the general public, but when you're talking about the people who really care, it's, you know, that little bit difference, that little weight reduction, that little bit of extra horsepower, it means everything. And that's what sticks out in collectors' minds. And on top of that, people may say, okay, well, they've hit the top of their value market. Well, people have said that about a lot of cars for a long time. I remember a point when people were saying 288 GTOs have reached the top of their market back when they were like $250,000. Well, look at them today, between $3 to $4 million. So when you're talking about the special, desirable, collectible cars, especially with a car like the 308, where it's so iconic and so memorable to people that really the sky is kind of the limit. You know, it's one of those cars that's forever going to stick out in people's minds. And that's why the Vetroresina, the fiberglass models, because they're the most powerful, the lightest, and the least produced, they're always going to hold that special place. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe and stay tuned because we got a lot more coming very soon.